Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome to the Stoa. Thank you for being here, everyone. So today we are launching a new podcast series called Soul Shivers. Soul Shivers is a growing collective of women working on earth regeneration in different ways. We decided to launch this inquiry here at the Stoa, one of my all-time favorite online communities, because of the rich landscape of learning and deep dialogue that happens here. So thank you to the Stoa for holding this space with us. We're going to be meeting once a week as a group on Tuesdays at this time for the next 4 weeks and dive deep into a collective inquiry around earth regeneration. To frame this dialogue, we selected 4 themes to guide our entirely unscripted conversations. The themes are ancestry, trauma, connection to place, and peace and nonviolence. Today, we are beginning with a discussion around ancestry. I'd like to take a moment to thank our circle of support that made this possible. Thank you to Partnerships for Change, our fiscal sponsor, and all the individuals that contributed to this fund. Thank you also to Viscaya Wagner, who created original art images to represent each theme. Her work is brilliant, and you should check her out if you haven't already. The image that we had up while the music was playing is an image that she created to represent ancestry, which is the theme of our conversation today. I'd also like to briefly introduce who we are. My name is Freya. I am an artist and an activist living in Italy. I am joined by my co-lead Luea, who is the creative steward of collective transitions and dedicated to widening the ways we see, sense, and respond across perceived divides. We are joined by Jane Ruka, chairwoman of the Waitaha Executive Grandmothers Council in New Zealand, Amber Tamm, Brooklyn farmer, floral designer, and horticulturist, Naomi Mwangi, a peace activist and executive director of international peace initiatives in Kenya, and Alexandra Gavilano, an environmental scientist and activist for social transformation and planetary protection. So the way our session today will go is we're gonna do about 45 minutes of dialogue between us. And then at that point, after 45 minutes, we'll open it up to Q&A. And just a reminder that this is being recorded and will be put on YouTube. So we may call on you to ask your question. And if you don't want to be on YouTube, please indicate that in the question and we can read the question on your behalf. So with that, over to Luea to bring us into the session with a question.
Thank you, Freya. Thank you, Stoa. And also a very warm welcome from my side. And yeah, just really deep gratitude that we can circle up with all these beautiful women from near and far and all of you joining us here. Before we dive into question, I just also want to acknowledge our ancestors, as that is the theme that guides us through this day, knowing we all are coming from rich lineages. Which is the moment also of appreciating everyone and all that is standing behind us here in this space. Yeah, and also to maybe for the ones who are listening at that very moment before we go into Q&A, just an invitation maybe to switch off your camera so we can actually see more fully the faces of the ones speaking, if that's okay for you, and then we can afterwards for the Q&A bring everyone alive again. Yeah, and so I would love to spark our first conversation of 4 to come with the question, who are actually your ancestors? And how do they influence your work in the world these days? To our four women, whoever of you feels ready to pick up the piece here and introduce your background a bit and where you're coming from.
I'm happy to introduce myself to the forum. My name is Jane Ruka. I'm a First Nation person of Aotearoa, better known as New Zealand. And we have a very long relationship with Papatūānuku. And that relationship connects us to everything within our known area, whether it be alive or a sentient being or part of our landscape. We are all attached to each other. Thank you. It's my start to this day.
I would follow you, Jane. I'm Alexandra. I'm half Swiss, half Peruvian. And this half I combined by just acknowledging that I'm from this home planet that we all call Earth. And I relate to Ancestry, I guess, since I first moved from Switzerland to Peru when I was 7 years old and started to realize how different these worlds are that collided. And I'm kind of this reflection of this collision. And with my 31 years now, I feel, and I'm looking back and I'm just acknowledging how much I learned and how much I recognized or rediscovered my ancestors and their way of being, be it in the Swiss context or be it in the Andean context of the highlands of Peru, where my family's from. Like both flows through me, and sometimes it's challenging because they're still colliding, and sometimes they're quite similar. And I suddenly realize this incredible strength, and that I'm not alone, but that I have all these ancestors carrying me and guiding me through my life. Thank you. I would love to hear from Amber.
I mean, you gave me the perfect segue. That question, I think, has spun me out in my life so many times. Because as a Black American woman who is but is not, right? Like who is African but also is not African, is American, who is indigenous to America but too Black to fit into these indigenous pockets, who is ancestrally Irish and Italian but too Black and indigenous to fit into that pocket. So this question has made me feel in the past a lot more pain and anguish than joy. But 7 years ago, when my mother was murdered by my father, I thought of Ancestry in a new way. I thought how powerful it is to be so young and have an ancestor that is a mom, that is very, very close. And in part, my mom was very young when she lost her mom also. So to have ancestors that died very young, but are also still very close, is very powerful. But also lonely in the sense of a lot of my peers at the time couldn't understand that sentiment. So for me, when it came down to like my mom, the place in which was my first place on this planet, then being buried into the planet, then that's what my ethos became. Like, well, if I'm gonna bury my mom into this earth and she is going to decompose in it, then my ancestry is this earth. And when looking back to, slavery in the Americas, all across, obviously, all of our ancestry is this earth, as that's where the DNA of so many of our family members are. And for me, just having no pictures, I don't know beyond my great grandma. I don't know beyond that. So having no pictures of previous ancestors, I have to lean on those who feel like it. So I welcome all the greats as my ancestors. I welcome George Washington Carver. I welcome Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. So I think of ancestry as the bones that you walk on, as the people you directly came from, but also as the people who inspire you.
Thank you all. That was so beautifully shared. My name is Naomi and I am from Kenya. I love my country. I love my country like no other. And I have had the opportunities to like travel to different places and interact with different people and different cultures. And for me, when it comes to ancestry, I look back to my tribe. And in Kenya, we have 42 tribes. And all these 42 tribes has a different story of how their tribes came to being from the ancestors and all that. And my tribe is called the Kikuyu tribe, which is one of the 3 most largest tribes in Kenya. And my ancestry is believed to have originated from a tree, a huge tree. We call it Mogumo tree. In English is the sycamore tree. So the tree did burst open and came out 2 people, that was the Gikuyu and Mumbi. And so they all were beautiful human beings, as my ancestry story is being told. And they all collaborated to give birth to 9 daughters, and there were no sons. So these daughters had to look for sons to continue bringing that generation and teaching the ancestry story to all these young daughters. So that is how my great-grandmother and my grandmother keep telling me stories of how we came to origin. And I feel so privileged to be here on earth. And I don't usually say that I am from my tribe. I usually say I am from the earth, because I know that the earth is the one that holds me and nourishes me, and that keeps me alive every single day. And my ancestry comes back from that. And even going back to looking on how we connect with the earth and how it's written on the Bible, or either on whatever we believe, because I know all of us here are from different beliefs and we believe so many different things, but it all connects back to the earth. And I believe that I was born from the earth, and my ancestries are on these footsteps that I walk on the earth that I am living in right now. And speaking about ancestries just makes me so alive, because there's so many things that I've gone through on my life here in Kenya that sometimes I even don't believe that ancestors exist. And I get confused of, if my ancestors are still alive and they're watching on me, then why can't they help me in these things that I get confused on? Why can't I not stop giving libation to ancestors before eating something, because the ancestors need to have it? And why do they need to have it? Because I I want to appreciate them more, or because I want them to help me, or why is it that I need to appreciate my ancestors? So I have been stuck with all these questions that I walk in with my life. And the only thing that keeps coming back to me is knowing that I am from the earth and my ancestors are here on the earth. Every person who walked on this ground, they had a purpose and they died, and now they had new generations coming in, like me and other fellow people who are here on this call today. And as we are walking on this ground, what are the footsteps are we leaving so that the other generations can come and not get lost into trying to understand who their ancestors are and why were their ancestors existing and why are we carrying those legacy of our ancestors.
That you're frozen for a moment. Actually, this word legacy brings up this curiosity of how have your ancestors, or whatever you call your ancestors, actually influenced your work that you're bringing as a contribution these days.
Yeah, that is all I wanted to share. And yeah, let's bring this on, people. This is our time.
Thank you, Naomi. We just lost you, I think, for a little sequence, but you actually gave me a beautiful piece with the word legacy to that question that Freya and I were like, what's the legacy that you have received from your ancestor that informs and influences your work these days?
I have one thing that kind of was emerging, Naomi, when you were talking, and I just felt this, and it doesn't directly answer your question, Luea, in the way that am actively excluding kind of positive experiences in regard of what I felt, but the word reparation was so present with me. So as an activist, as a scientist, I feel like right now we are confronted with having to do reparation work in regard of the climate crisis, the ecological crisis that has happened in the last 100 years, that is merely destroying the way of the environments that we as a species and a lot of species and beings with us can survive. But actually, that was what I was sitting with the last few days, is that we're actually seeing that reparation work is coming in all these different ways of ignorance that the last 500 or maybe even longer humanity has been living. It can be, linked to decolonization, linked to oppression, linked to belief systems, that were so dominant. And what I feel so strongly is that right now we're really kind of confronted with all these different layers that somehow they feel like they don't fit anymore, and they don't fit our earth. So it's not just what the ancestors gave us in regard of learning in a positive way on how I usually feel it, or also much more present, but it's actually so dominant in my personal life as well, that I dedicate my life to work for nature. And I'm doing it in a context, in a country, in Switzerland, where I do not feel held. Like, I feel so much more disconnected. I don't feel, also, even though especially in winter, when my skin is lighter, like, people don't see, they assume just, oh, you're from here, you're like us, like, and even with my partner, like, I feel this disconnection so strongly. And I just realized it has, just because it's really these different layers, and the more my awareness grows, um, the more also kind of feelings of sadness, or also feelings of being overwhelmed that humanity has been so ignorant, or like, how is it possible, like, that for so many topics and so long time we kept on ignoring and kept on destroying ourselves among each other and all these other beings. And what does it also mean for us that live now, that all these symptoms are now getting to a point that we do no longer want to accept it. We do no longer want this to be the truth. And as you said, Naomi, so beautifully, kind of the traces that we leave for the future.
I think
you. So sorry, Amber. You first.
sure.
Yes.
Okay. Alexandra mentioned layers, and I think that's a really great question pertaining to legacy, because generations of people can be stacked like layers. Or when I think about the layers of the earth, it's really important because different layers represent different things. And I think like legacy, normally people jump at that. It's like, what are you going to continue? And I think one of the parts that we need to dig deeper into is, what are we going to unlearn? And I think for me, that's what I feel responsible for within my own personal lineage. Like, there are an abundance of things that need to be unlearned, that have been held, that I can feel within my own body, that may be adding to layers of sickness in my own body that aren't mine. And that's not something I want to keep bringing forward if I am to have children. So I think a lot about, what haven't we done, or what didn't we have the chance to do due to many different things going on. And when I say that question, it's super vague and big and ginormous. But when we synthesize that to earthworks, it gets a little bit more doable, a little bit more scalable. And I honestly, I would encourage anybody on this planet right now to consider, what are you going to discontinue for legacy's sake?
That's I highlight again to all of you that I am a lot older than all of you, and have had the experience of coming through the destruction. And I'm going to say here that the destruction was caused by patriarchy, who in their learnings and their cultural systems left behind the connections to our Mother Earth, Papatuanuku. My culture has an ancestry that's called whakapapa, and it takes us right back to our God systems. Our gods, we are descendants of them. So when we reach the end of humanity in our ancestry, which we do, in all the Pacifica nations have these connections. In New Zealand, we are descendants of multiple Pacifica cultures. We also have connections to Peruvian cultures, South American cultures, to Taiwan, and to the Himalayas. Multiple centuries of those that come through in our DNA. And having landed here in New Zealand, Aotearoa, sitting here without influence of colonization until 1716, the late 1700s. And it was in that connection to our ancestry that colonization superseded us. That needs to be forgotten. In moving ahead of time, we are in generations, your age and younger generations, who are awake and aware that we cannot continue in this manner. We do not actually have to, our indigenous folk do not have to unlearn anything. We have to drop it off us, because we are descendants of people who still care and still have our histories of care and stewardship for everywhere we live. We do not have to unbind ourselves. We just have to emphasize our cultural belief systems that go back histories, multiple centuries. We own reparation. We do not have anything to unlearn. And for the cultures that do have to relearn, we and they can go together to improve where we sit in this age. We cannot presume that the people of your age and younger do not understand how to save Mother Earth. They do, or we would not have this connection, you to me and me to the rest of the people who are sitting here participating in our conversations. I would like to encourage everybody. You are all indigenous to wherever your blood comes from. It doesn't take much to utilize those beautiful things that we own as our ancestral rights. I am firmly of the belief that we need to forget all these heavinesses that come out of being superseded by another culture. Amber, I'm particularly not talking to you because you have been devastated as an African-American person. You have not had the freedom which we have had in being colonized in New Zealand. We can still walk around and be proud of where we whakapapa back to gods. If you belong to a god, they're stronger than any colonizing force that comes at you. So you don't have to worry about the colonization. You just have to throw it off your shoulders. It doesn't belong to you. And you can borrow some of mine, Amber. I give it to you free of charge. Go back to your gods, because that's where your belief system comes out of. You do not need to be carrying, oh, I'm a slave. You do not, and I know very well that you will not accept that. So go back and say, I'm the descendant of a god. And no one can challenge that, whatever nationality they are your gods. And your gods are very powerful if you give them the right to own you. Believe in it, Amber, and believe in it, Alexandra. You're lucky. You've got a choice of multiple gods with your blood systems. We all need to get away from being afraid of somebody with a machine gun, because we are the people who are regenerating the system to save us, all of us, not just the whites and the blacks and the purples and pinks. We are in this all together if we need to get above this climate problem. And I really could go on forever, but I'd like to hear someone else's opinion. And I really beg you all to remember that you are descendants of gods. And when some other person who doesn't look like you approaches you and wants to be in charge of you, you know in your own blood that you belong to a god. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Mama. I'll repeat this again. Every time when Jane speaks, there's just so much that lights up in me. And I feel like you should just come over here in Kenya and bring this to the young generations that are growing up here in Kenya. There's so much that we are carrying on our shoulders, and we don't want to let them down because of the cultures that we are coming from, the things that we know from the systems that have taught us to know, yet we even don't know them. We don't even see them. Can't even grab them, but we just keep them. And because the system has programmed us in a way that we can't even think for ourselves, and we are waiting to be to be told by someone else. And I'll just give a small instance, and I love sharing this story because it's something that is true and alive in me, and I'm learning every time from it. I continue relearning and relearning as we are talking about unlearning and relearning. And my situations of being a survivor of the post-election violence that happened in Kenya in 2007 to 2008, that was a conflict of tribal interests. And the conflict was all about the governmental seats, which even doesn't affect the citizens. The citizens should share their voices, and their voices should be heard, instead of government oppositions and positions thinking of they have the decisions that they can make for the citizens. But that came along to the young generation that was growing, because the young generations were being used to go into people's homes, burn their homes, kill people with machetes and all these other terrible things that happened. And I'm lucky that my family survived all that, and none of my family died or anything like that. But the main thing that really pains me so much is that we are losing the sense of where we come from, the sense of how our cultures have brought us to knowing that we can share our voices and use our voices to know who we are by sharing the growth that is coming in from us, from what we were taught by our ancestors, and not what we are being taught by the systems. And that is what we lack as young people here. We keep knowing that the system is the one that is controlling us, and we're not listening to the voices of what the ancestors in us are inviting us to do, to where we are right now and where we are heading to. So when I hear you talk, Jane, it really gives me a lot of energy and strength to know that I should continue listening to my deeper ancestral voice, because that is what I've been shutting down. And that is the voice that is calling up for me to show up to who I am, and also be an example to other people in my communities. And thank you for saying that, because right now I'm lacking words, and I feel like there's a lump in my throat, but I know that this is what we are here for, to hear each other's voice and also know the worth of being in our ancestral steps, and knowing that these steps are the steps that we need to hold. So I'm just so grateful. Thank you, Jane, for that.
Yeah, thank you also, and also Naomi, to share again. And it's actually it's a journey that I've been just going on, and I think it's exactly once, or it's maybe a question that I wonder, like, is this the reason why can we're like moving a bit forward and then again back? Because for me it's actually I'm like the ancestors, I'm feeling them very, very clearly. And as you said, like I have from two bloods, but it is that I first just really felt them most of my life, much more from the Latin American side. And I remember when I met Luea, and we once had the discussion on traumas and collective traumas. Kind of, I went through a journey with feeling all these different kind of past experiences, and I just remembered that when you said to Amber to throw it away, because kind of having this the ones that colonized and the ones that were oppressed within me. Um, but at the same time, and that's something that because I usually am in strength, and I find it quite easy to connect. But there are periods, like I just had this weekend, where I just question myself, like, what does it need for this kind of collective, engagement, this collective awakening and this trust? And I feel like trust and courage to trust is one key of it. Like I can say, like, in school or in my education or in my surrounding, I was not engaged to trust. Like it was just, to produce, to this is the context we're in. And a lot of times when I'm in discussions with people, I just realize that we often lack the courage to do something entirely different. As you said, for example, trust that we all have our ancestor, we all have our basis, we all can trust in what we feel can bring us forward, and where our intuition takes us along. And for me, this is, to put it in the bigger context, one of the main questions where I wonder, like, how can we activate people to connect again, a species? Because a species, we're just one, or maybe we're a few more, but like of what we talk or are taught by, we are one species expressed as humanity, and we're not 100, and we're not the main part, but we're just one name, Homo sapiens, on the list of it. And I wonder, I'm just wondering, and I'm just putting it out there for everyone, like what kind of places can we create to enable people to feel the courage and to also feel the lust to actually dive into it and just, imagine what is has not existed yet, because that's what I believe is the new thing, and brings us in the here and now. Is really, we maybe have been connected in the past, but we don't remember, and of what we know, we have never been that connected and confronting our past as we are today. So we are even able to create something entirely new now for the future. We are able to connect entirely in new ways and forms. And just getting back to this one image of this blue planet that's kind of out there all by itself, in the universe, turning around and having its good distance to the sun, so it feels okay. So we all are this one planet, and this planet is us. So that's the feeling I'm with. Thank you so much for sharing it, Jane.
Welcome. I'm really encouraged from my age when I see the informed generations, your generation and below. We have a really important time in history when technology allows us to reach out to everybody. And hopefully for everybody, you cannot immediately do the whole world and regenerate the whole world. What you really need to do is regenerate yourselves into the belief you are who you are, and then you can communicate in your specific area so that, but in doing your area, keep in touch with everybody else by these technological improvements, so that what's happening with you is available to everybody else, just like we're conversing now and we're spreading our information out here. Imagine all the teens coming through, and I have a grandchild who's 7 and 8. She's far cleverer than I am on technology. That's what our hope is right there. You are going to make it happen for her, that she doesn't have to start where you're starting. In the same manner, where I walk, my daughter is informed everything I do, so that when she inherits her generational responsibility, she doesn't have to start by someone else teaching her. She has her ancestral rights of information handed down generationally, so that by the time my 7-year-old grandchild approaches her time of need, she's got 3 generations known to her. She doesn't have to have a professor or a scientist teaching her. Congratulations on your scientific qualifications, my dear. You are what starts the question of how does it get better? Because unless you're informed yourself, you cannot pass that on. So sit, if you have a child, any of you, make very sure that child is at your elbow, because if every person in the whole world has the next generation at its elbow, it will not require anybody else to come and teach it how to regenerate the environment. All we all have to remember is we do not believe in patriarchy. I have a grandson who's a beautiful man. I have relations who are beautiful men. So if we do not allow patriarchy to overcome us again, we walk equally with them. Women must step up to the plate and be very affirmed. Naomi, I'm speaking to you. I congratulate you. Firmly stand there as women, because right now you're getting the changeover where men are recognizing they do not have the knowledge to save the world. Even more to the point, they cannot breed more world without your help. So go out there as very strong people. You are strong in your womanhood. Nobody else can own that except women. So we need to change and move patriarchy out of the positions of authority in the world. If we reach out here, because we have beautiful men in the world, because they're not like the corporate responsible people. I'm talking about men now. I'm not talking about corporate women because they're an ideology. So just hold it and push this around the world. Hold on to your women gender authority, because that's going to be what passes down in the generations. And your sons do not come up pretending to be army-driven men. We do not need armies in the world. We need to be able to defend ourselves. And your sons and your grandsons can help you to defend yourself, but you can help them as well. We need to reassert balance in this world. We're in a very good place to do that. We just need to push patriarchy to make space for our gender to come in and be authoritative in that space. And I see it in you lovely ladies. Thank you.
I think that narrative of walking side by side with your mother, and that narrative of, I always think in 1% increments. Like like when I first lost my mom, my first thought was like, how can I make my lineage 1% better? Or even when I'm farming on the daily, I'm thinking of how can I make, working with the land 1% better. And I think that narrative that Jane just shared about, over time, starting with now, but over time it getting better, is one that needs to be heard, because it can provide so much relief. Especially for, I think for me, I feel that relief deeply because ancestrally, I didn't come from the Southern American states, so I had no link to land. Like my family has been in New York City for 4 generations at this point, so my only link to land was like the little piece of soil and tree that is surrounded by concrete. And so that was previous for my mom, and then previous for my mom's mom, etc. So I do think that starting with, what do you want to start? What do you want to bring? But not all of it is super, that just relieves my heart. Because I think there's so much. When I just look at my ancestry, it's like there's just so much that is unknown, or we don't know how to fix it, or we don't know how we got this way. When in reality we do, when we think about the larger narrative of patriarchy and the son of patriarchy being racism. But there's a lot of relief I feel to just focus on what feels good to me, as a way of healing the lineage in the future.
So many things have stood out to me as I listened to all of you. I particularly loved, to the sort of the invitation to put your knowledge in the relationships that you have. And as an activist and someone who spends a lot of time thinking about the turmoil that the world is in, and even in my own neighborhood or family, I sometimes get bogged down by the bigness of the problem, how it's everywhere. It seems as if there's no hope. And when I shift from that feeling to put your knowledge in your relationships, all of a sudden, everything that I do becomes more influential. And I do have 2 young kids, and thinking about how I can do that and embody that and practice that every single day is incredibly hopeful. It's like the best insurance plan ever, right? um, I don't need to store my knowledge on, Gmail. I actually have a web of relationships that exist around me at all times that I can choose to invest in. And within that perspective, I'm constantly building and enhancing the field of regeneration, perhaps, that that can expand in all sorts of unseen ways as I breathe that into it. And I think that's really important for activists to remember, right? It's not just about logging on and connecting around the world, and that tension between, that technology tension that I feel constantly, which is on the one hand connection, and on the other hand really profound disconnection. I'm still alone in an office building in an urban sort of industrial area in Italy. It's almost 8 p.m. Everyone has left the office. I'm totally alone in this building right now, and yet I'm online with all of you. So it's interesting. We live in paradoxical times, right? And navigating that is central to activism now in these times, right? Which I think is important to remember. So with that, I would love to hear questions from all of you, and please let's turn the video cameras back on so we can see your faces. And yeah, let's get into it. Let's open it up to the participants in the room. Peter?
Please, Peter.
I can warm up the room, and feel free to start throwing your questions in the chat right now for everyone else. So the thing that really hit home for me was the line that Jane said, men are realizing that they cannot save the world. And like, speaking for myself, there was always this like save the world desire when I was young. And if I'm honest, I don't even know how to live my life, like forget saving the world. And so this is a question for everyone, but especially for those who have been cut off from their ancestors and from their gods. How do we start listening to what they're telling us?
Oh man, please go to the earth. I swear on everything I know, and I have lived in my 25 years, my little 25 years, I would not be on this call right now if I was not homeless and hungry and started farming. I swear on everything I know, Mama Earth is the only reason I am here and this healthy, straight up.
Thank you for that, Amber. That's absolutely where it is. And I need to qualify what I said about men destroying Papatūānuku. Following very fast on the heels of that comment is that the present generation is awake and aware that their ancestors, descendants of the colonists, are very aware that they and us need to fix the problem of Papatūānuku. Thank you, Amber, because that's where the solution is. And that's what we have to fix, regenerate. And that's our answers for humanity. And Lauren from A Growing Culture is already well on the road to putting a platform available to everybody and how it happens. Many people are on that platform. So descendants of colonizers are already on our side. So we need to be all together in this, not them and us. There is no them and us. There is just us, all of us, equalizing the control of everything, man and women together, equally, not one stronger than the other. And then we might have peace where we can all run to the earth as you did, Amber, and feed yourself. Thank you for that, putting that out in so everybody can hear it.
Does anyone else want to speak to that question? I think it's a really deep invitation. How can we reconnect with our gods if our ancestry, if we can't remember our ancestry?
Honestly, for me, I think it's by knowing who we are, knowing what I'm worth of, what my worth is, what I am made of, and what I believe in. If I don't know who I am, then I don't know who my people are. If I don't know who I am, then I can't even listen to what other people are saying. So going back to my roots of discovering who am I and what am I meant to be on this earth and what is the earth calling me to do. Those are the things that I feel personally that I have grown into, discovering who I am, and most importantly, just using my voice, sharing what I know is right for me and not waiting to be told what is right. And the part where that I think I learn, I continue relearning on so many things. So my invitation is just to going back to who am I? Who are you? What do you say you are? And taking out all these things of our names, where we come from, who our mothers and fathers are, their tribes, their languages, all that, taking them out and not hearing the voices of what the community is telling us who we are or telling me who I am, what the world is telling me who I am. What is that one thing that I know I am made of? I am more.
We've lost Naomi. Alexandra, do you want to think about the question while we wait for her to come back in, or Luea?
I can share. I hope Naomi's coming back soon. It really was like, yes, yes, yes. That's what I felt mostly. And I just would like to take up to kind of still, as Naomi said, like letting away of what people tell us that we are. I think that's one key thing that I had to learn, like letting go of the images that others want to impose on me, but actually enabling myself to always rediscover my truth, who I am. And I was raised super atheistic by my parents, and they kind of left all kind of religions in the bag out of different reason. And I can really also say it comes to you if you're open and if you're grounded. And I personally also, I had to be in nature. Like I was living off grid 2 years, and I needed that to actually just allow myself to put my thinking, my head, which was so trained to be so dominant and take on all the Alexandra space in me and behaving like it would be all part of me, but it was just my head that kind of was inflating itself, and give that, put it somewhere else and just letting the space to really feel and resonate. And I couldn't even name it on one level, but I just feel it's present. It's not one specific thing or one specific idea. And this is again where I just would invite you to trust in yourself to find all the answer there within you, and all the things that it will need. Suddenly your eyes, your awareness will be led exactly to that point that again reminds your inner self, hey, yes, that's what it's all about. And I just saw Naomi come back, so we missed you. So please go on with the end. I was kind of starting with a yes, yes, yes. What you said.
Oh yeah, I was saying yes, yes. That is what is alive in me right now. And then boom, my internet, I don't know, went off. But yeah.
We received this beautiful question. Building a bit on your question, Peter, how you personally have found or revived your relationship with the sacred.
I could say a little bit more about that if you would appreciate that. And maybe first just too, how much I'm appreciating this conversation, just how nourishing it is, and how in particular to have an elder like yourself, Jane. It's just, I realize I feel like I have an elder hunger, you know. Like I have this deep desire to receive the teachings and the transmissions of people who've been walking this path for so long. So thank you for joining, and thank you, the rest of you, for offering your deeply insightful and wise voices. But yeah, I guess I just wonder, you know, as someone who's, I mean, I wasn't brought up religious, but culturally kind of Christian, but don't really resonate with that faith. I've been in this process of trying to understand, yeah, what is the sacred, and how do we, in our own lives, maybe within a religion or maybe not, find contact with that again. So any experiences or thoughts you would have would be great.
If you're particularly directing your question to me, I think from your age group, the answer would be more effective for you if it came from the other members who are in the group. Just know that age gives you advantages that you don't have for the generations below you. By the time you reach my age, a lot has gone water under the bridge, and you can form opinions that are very powerful. But sitting amongst your age group is the birth of those powers. And the young ladies who are accompanying me on this panel have already lived through trauma, and it's trauma that generates results. So to achieve, I'm not asking for trauma to descend on you. I'm just saying that a 25-year-old on this panel has been traumatized to homelessness and resolved it by growing a garden. So that is where you need to look at any deficiency that you feel that an elder could supply you with. You just need to connect to these people who have, at their very early ages, been traumatized. And people have been traumatized down to infancy, so that it doesn't actually sit in the elderly to have all the answers. It sits amongst your age group looking for how to put your contribution into resolving and regenerating, equalizing the lack that we all experience at this moment in time. But we have an advantage that our ancestors didn't have. We have communication abilities, so nobody can lie to us. A corporation can't devastate a whole country and make a huge profit, and we can be in ignorance of it because we have world communication now. And my suggestion to you is you could communicate with these young members on this panel today and be really affirmed that traumatizing produces wizardry. And sitting in Amber and Naomi and Alexandra and Freya is wizardry. I'm not excluding you, Luea. I'm just saying in amongst this panel is the Harry Potter ideal of wizards and witches, because they have been traumatized, my dear. And I don't wish you to be traumatized to learn. You just need to connect with them. if that's an answer. Thank you for your question.
I will say 1000%. When I was at my mom's funeral, there was one woman that came to me and said, your life is going to be hell. Like, it's going to be hard. But if you look at any great woman in the world, she has went through like some form of hell. And I think that's exactly what Jane is saying, is that there is a quote unquote like hero's journey in all of us. But I think you have to surrender to the traumatizing aspects of it. And I mean that for me, like I mean that when I think of Harriet Tubman, like utilizing nature spaces to get to freedom, like I can't imagine the hell that is. And it low-key breaks my heart that there isn't documentation of what she was feeling, because her narrative would be super different if she wrote down what she was feeling. The applause would not come so easily if she wrote down the hell that it was to do that several times over. But we only know the action. So I think my like direct answer to that question is it's in the everyday subtleties, including prayer. Like I make sure that I at least get up and feel gratitude. And if I don't, then I can't get up yet. I make sure that I walk with intention, at least for some amount of time, and activate prayer in that way. But overall, I think for me, it was a surrender to Mama Earth herself. For me, it was, if I know, there's no belief. If I know that trees can communicate to each other through root networks, then I have to also know, it is my duty to now know that through me utilizing my fingers in the earth, I can still talk to all my mothers, even the ones I've never seen, never met. And so that's where my connection with earth comes from. It's not, it just so happens to feed others. It just so happens to empower others. And specifically in America, seeing a Black woman farmer is an act, a revolutionary act. But for me, it was the most selfish thing I could ever do is say, I just want to talk to my mom all day, every day. That is the only thing I'm trying to do, because I can't, at the time, because I was 17, 18, I just couldn't handle trying to be an adult yet. So to simplify it and say, I can't talk to my mom the way I just did. I haven't met these many, many ancestors, but I can plant something and I can use that as a form of prayer, of intention, of building this conversation, and of trusting. I tell you no lie, it is always super surreal to be on a call like this, because 7 years ago, I was in the predicament that Jane was just talking about, which is being surrounded by my peer group. And to this day, just roommate wise, like being surrounded by peer groups who are going through traumatizing things and wanting to understand, wanting that connection. And the avoidance is real. So that's my personal answer.
Amber, thank you so much for sharing again and again. It's just so beautiful to hear and feel actually how you connect. I would also like to answer to this question and just kind of giving another kind of piece to all this truth. I believe, like, or from my story, I can say I was very ignorant during years towards, I went through extreme violence when I was, until I was 15, more or less. And I ignored it. Like, I forgot even 7 years of my life. Like, I could just kind of replicate the things that I saw on pictures. And I was like, yeah, it was good. And it was actually a foot massage that kind of triggered the images within seconds. And I was like, okay, this must feel like if you die, like when you see your life. But it was just kind of the bad stuff. and I mean, in my past and even in this period that was difficult, I also met, shamans and people, that have like a lot of knowledge. And I can tell you, like, that's not the key. Like, it's not. And I met them without wanting to search them. I was a kid, basically, but kind of it crossed my way. And it was again and again that I felt like they were always like, you should, you have to look into it. You will see it. You're one of us. And I was just like, but how? And I was like, no, I somehow know it's not my path. And it was another traumatizing event, losing a kid in the 5th month, 2 days after I decided I will go back to Switzerland and I will study. So this was for me a huge challenge, and I lost that kid. And that was when my spiral down kind of was leashed, and I realized all of this pain. And I can tell you, it doesn't have to be a big trauma. Like, there can be very small traumas and very small experiences. Like, I remembered small experience of mobbing, where kids painted me with kohl to appear more similar like my dad, or they cut off my hair so it's more curled, that I look like my dad. Like, small things that I would have never allowed myself to say, yes, this was traumatizing at that moment. So I would just invite you, give yourself the space to make your own check. I absolutely agree with Jane, probably some level of trauma, but I would like to just also not question, but kind of just also go through, because trauma is never the same. Something that's bad for me, for you might not be bad, like in your perspective. So we never have the same understanding of what is bad or what is traumatic. So I'm sure, like, all of you that somehow feel cold, there is some linkage already there. There is some reason also why you all are here, why we all are here in this together. And the big thing of what I had to learn is to feel much more how my heart actually feels, how my inner child actually feels, to be able to open up for new things. So I cannot say it was dulling to connect with my ancestors, but it was kind of the first little steps that I'm taking, and I'm keep on discovering also kind of where my focus should shift, what my true inner being wants to tell me and wants to create my focus on.
It's really interesting thinking about this topic, Earth regeneration, which of course is sort of how we all connected and why we're here, is because we're all thinking about environmental degradation and climate change and homelessness and war and perpetual violence and racism and all of these, so this sort of polycrisis, right, that we find ourselves in. And it's just so interesting to have a space such as this where that's the premise of our conversation, and yet we're talking about ancestry, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about our lived day-to-day experience and how to, not only how to survive within it, but to work with it, to use it as a mechanism for healing, because we believe in that. And that is the sacred, right? That's what defending the sacred is. That's a living systems understanding of how we work, how we're programmed, how the earth works. And yet in the mainstream conversation around all of these, around this polycrisis, this multifaceted polycrisis, you get a lot of terminology around solutions and one size fits all, and sort of how are we going to design our way out of these problems. And of course, a lot of it is quite meaningful. I saw today, like, Elon Musk is launching a new sort of carbon sucking program, right? And it's like, that's clearly really needed, and yet it doesn't go to the depths of, for example, where we've gone just today in our conversation. And sort of where we believe, we believe that we need to actually go there if real transformation is possible, right? So it's just, and of course this, I've been deeply inspired by indigenous knowledge systems and local knowledge systems um, because of spending time with these groups and learning from them, and it's been such a privilege to be able to do that and be mentored by so many communities that have strong links to their ancestry, and that sort of blood memory is still alive and pumping through them. And one common thread that I keep noticing is this living systems perspective. The world is alive, everything is alive around us. Even in some sense, like my phone is like at some level, right? Like maybe it's not a primary level, but and yeah, so it's on the one hand, you have a very sort of fractured, divided, siloed sort of understanding of what's required for deep transformation in the mainstream, I think. And then in the underground, in the margins, in the cracks, you have communities like us that are saying no, it actually, transformation, radical transformation, deep transformation requires something so different than that. It's surprising. And yeah, I'm seeing in the chat like duality, not quality, and Elon Musk stuff. Yeah, we should try to get Elon Musk into this room and see what he has to say about about blood memory and ancestry. So anyway, those are some of the things that are alive for me right now. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
I would like to react or just add, and this is it even goes together with the question from Laura before. There is this feelings, and there are different words of it, but I usually work with the name earth emotions, kind of these emotions that we feel because we as this one species that connects us, we all feel them. They all at some point flow through us, and they have to do with the destruction and the different aspects that you just mentioned, Freya, like the destruction of our habitat, and there's some intrinsic part of us, and it can have very different aspects, positive and negative, but they flow through us, and very often we're not aware of them, thus interpreted maybe as I'm depressed or I'm etc etc. And this is maybe also another linkage on how can we actually connect when we learn about it, when we learn about those for example, solastalgia. Solastalgia is, it was there is a term, it was defined by Glenn Albrecht from Australia, who basically lost his home because a coal mine came there. So geographically the place is still there, but it's not what he loved. It's not the nature, the smell, the birds, the animals, the community. It's all gone. And we all can have like this also fear of losing such things, or like what one thing that I was dealing a long time with without knowing that it is nerve emotion is I hated to be human. I was ashamed of my own species, that and I was like, how can we not do better? And I found myself on the ground and telling her, if I'm so sorry, I will try, I will try to tell them that's not our way. And like years after, and I just now with my activities also with Extinction Rebellion in regenerative culture, I actually learned like about these things, and it was so nourishing to kind of realize, wait, like that's something we go through, and people that from you that might find themselves at some point in a direct action, in a non-violent direct action on the streets, like that's when you feel it most, if you're at the forefront. And the feelings go up, and that's why it's so important to debrief and to always get again the safe spaces that we also can let go of these earth emotions that are, they will always be present, and it's okay to feel them, and it's at some point necessary to also engage people to act. Because if we act with the brain, we're in ideology. If we act with the heart and we acknowledge that we, our species, is part of the problem and even patriarchy, we can step into action. So I would just invite you all to check it out.
I just want to add on to what Freya and Alexandra were saying and say that I think this narrative of duality super important to really emphasize, even the duality of this conversation in comparison to Elon Musk. Only really on the premise of, from my experience working with the earth within the realms of agriculture and being on the same migrant farm trails as other immigrants from Mexico or from South America or from the Caribbean, it became very clear to me on bigger conventional, GMO farms that feelings didn't matter. And I think that's a part of the patriarchy, that like what you feel is not logistics, right? It doesn't inform anything. You're supposed to just show up and work. And when I look back at my ancestry, me having that experience with other people, when I look back at my ancestry and that being the same thread, like what you feel doesn't matter. I think that's how conversations like this become a part of regeneration or regenerative agriculture, because of course your feelings matter if you're working with living matter, right? If I'm going to plant food, if I'm going to caretake soil, of course my feelings matter when I'm doing that, just like happy cooking yields happy meals. But I want to emphasize that this is a very important part and something that I myself, it has felt like a fight within the realm of regenerative agriculture, is helping people understand the person aspect, not the yield or the product or the technique. And there's so much content in agriculture around all of those things. But when it comes to like, well, how does the farmer actually feel about doing this work? Or are they being caretaken for as a part of this work? Like that conversation is brand new for this time. So I do think that duality over time, there will be integration, but because it's almost like in its infancy stage, it's going to need to constantly be caretaken, and you're going to have to say the same things a million times, because that's the only way we can get closer to that integration.
I really like that, how we feel is important. It's in the end, that's information too, right? That's telling us something important. And I really believe in creative collaboration, in those feelings you get when you're like in a flow, or you're working and you're so connected to what you're doing. Like that's when the best thinking comes out. And I I can't help but think that like that's also part of regeneration, is establishing and working into a field that sets the conditions for all of life to essentially be creative and fulfill its unique creative expression in life. Um, and instead, we're constantly sort of having to conform and fit into systems of logic and physical systems and spaces and ways of being and ways of looking and ways of talking and interacting. And yet we still manage somehow, many of us, right? Most of us even perhaps, to have those moments despite all of the obstacles, where we are able to flourish in really surprising ways. Um, so yeah, I love that. Like how we feel matters. That's part of Earth regeneration. That's really important information to take into account as we work on, quote unquote solutions.
What just sparked what you said about also the ancestors, also acknowledging the strength that we can rely on and the resilience that through hardships that we don't know anymore, we have others to deal with these days. But there is a power of knowing how to again and again overcome, regenerate, call upon something that's so much larger than what we could even find names for. There is, for me, when I hear the word soil, then I see how we are constantly, when touching it, rewiring in a way the synapses that may have gotten rusty or got deactivated or got blocked or cut. Like we are rewiring as we are touching soil, matter, other human beings. For me, it has a lot to do with, rewiring the systems that got somewhere broken or not nourished anymore. So, and for me, there's also a part of, throughout this whole conversation, I realized I become more and more silent, as if words disappear, as if it's harder and harder to give expression through that form of language, because other parts of me want to speak that, of course, in this medium is a bit hard to convey. Yet I know I feel you, and I know there is connection across literally the globe at this stage, but also feeling the limitation when we really deep dive into the earth and what has brought us to the point we are, good and bad. If we talk about duality, there I lose the realm of words. And I just actually, my system calls for sitting in silence together and honor all that is and honor all that was. Knowing there is a reason why we are at that brink of polycrises, etc. There is also a huge opportunity to remember what we are made of as one species.
We're nearing our closing time, and I would love to just hear a few last words from each of you. Just anything that feels alive or you'd like to close with. Naomi, do you want to start?
Absolutely. What is feeling alive in me right now is the invitation that I just had it so clearly from Luea of sitting in silence. And before this call, I was just thinking about how sitting in silence makes us hear the deeper voices that we are not aware of when we go out there in the world and hear all these noises. And there's always that deeper voice that keeps calling you and asking you to pay attention, but we ignore it, and that voice comes from the heart. So right now, my point of calmness and wanting to bring all these voices that I've had today in me and just to listen to all of them. What is the calling that is being wanting to be shared and heard? And my invitation is for all of us, before we close our day or before we go out there into the morning and do our work, just sit for a moment in silence and listen to what is the deeper voice in your heart telling you to do or calling you to do at the moment, and just let that flow in you and follow that. And I'm so grateful and humbled to have all of you in this call, and I can't wait to explore more dialogues with all of you. So thank you so much.
Amber?
I think, maybe a couple days before our first call, I got a text from a good friend that said, we as humans need regeneration too. And I've also heard Jane say that today. So I'm taking that as a symbol, especially here in New York City, where it's real winter energy to regenerate. And I would just offer that to everyone, to take this opportunity to regenerate, hibernate. If we're going to have regenerative conversation, we need to have regenerative rest and regenerative nourishment, etc.
Alexandra?
Yes, I actually just got a text before our call today with my colleague asking, hey, you have so many over hours. Do you want to regenerate and take a month off? So that was also kind of, yeah, like that sounds so good. I was not even aware. And it's just so interesting. I'm just taking it up of what you said with the text that you got. So it's this community space. I'm just appreciating this space and knowing all of you are out there, all of those that have listened to us. And I'm just appreciating, like I feel this silence, and I'm happy to take also the invitation of you, Naomi, up, because I just feel like breathing and being thankful for being. Thank you.
Beautiful. Jane, would you be willing to close our circle out?
I'd be very honored to do that. And I leave you with my thoughts, and that I have huge hope. And if you are all an example of humanity, we are winners already in our battle for regeneration of everything. Hold fast to the fact that we together can make this happen worldwide. On that note, Henry tēnei ki te atua, ngā atua rangi nui papatua nuku. Haere mai, hau mai, noho mai I roto tēnei kōrero. Kia pā tu te ora ki te ao. Kia mōhi o tātou, he oranga tēnei. Haere mai, hoki mai, nā atua. Hoki wai rua mai, hoki wai rua mai, hoki wai rua mai, kio ka huri ka putatu, ka mutu tēnei tā.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Jane, for that beautiful prayer. And we hope to see you next week at the same day, the same time. And our theme will be trauma. So stay tuned and be well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.